listening to the Factivist Sports Podcast, putting data back into sports conversation. Now for your hosts, Wyatt Simonik and Jake Kindle.
Hello and welcome to the Factivist Sports Podcast. I'm Wyatt Simonik and I'm joined here with Jake Kindle, and this is our second episode. We have a lot to talk about today. Some cool stuff has happened over the weekend. But first of all, what did you think of that college football that first week? I guess this is the second week, but first week for the big teams, right?
Yeah, Hawaii and a couple teams that played the first weekend, they don't really get credit for that week, right?
Yeah.
No one's talking about that. Week one, so from a national perspective, we talked about our relevancy index last week. And really, I'm just going to touch on three teams that jumped out to me after week one. And I messaged a friend or my brother-in-law, and I said, hey, the three leaders in the house for the college football playoff after week one, based on their performances: Ohio State, 77-31 over Oregon State.
That's a lot of points.
Win. Alabama, I believe that one was 55-10.
Tua looked good.
And then Oklahoma, 63-14 over,
Lane Kiffin.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on his name. Yeah,
I heard. I saw where he said Oklahoma, they played absolutely lights out, and obviously they were. I think FAU was an 11-win team last year, and Oklahoma just blew them out of the water. And FAU, it's not like a terrible program, right? 11 wins, but Oklahoma, they look good. They were firing on all cylinders last week. So
from a national perspective, that's what I got. And then locally, I just wanted to do, and we may in different weeks and episodes, we may do a deeper dive into a recap on the local games. Yeah. Utah playing Weber State, as Frank Drebin would say, nothing to see here. But really the two takeaways I had, the positive, they gave up 59 yards on defense. That's a great number. I don't care who you're playing. Right. But the negative is they had 4 turnovers on offense. So they gave the ball. They were a little bit sloppy, but week one, in the books. BYU, the positive for me is a twofold thing. They had 183 yards and 3 touchdowns rushing on offense. BYU, I don't have the specific number in front of me, but when they play P5 teams, if they get over 100 yards, that's a huge barometer in their success and their opportunity to win that game.
Yeah, Squally, he had a really good game. He looked good.
Yeah, and then the positive from a defensive perspective was Khalil Tate, 8 carries, 14 yards, 1 touchdown.
And watching that game, I thought they were going to use Khalil Tate a lot more than they did. Only 8 carries. And for a guy last year, he used his legs a lot, and he made a lot of defenses pay for that. So, but props, like you said, props to BYU and Utah. They both came out with victories. Big win for BYU. Going down to Tucson, week one, P5 team, that's an impressive win. That's a good win for them.
Now, my negative for BYU, really 2, would be 0 takeaways on defense. And offense, great third quarter, but that's all they had. 21 points in that quarter. They've got to close the game out when they have a big lead, which they did by getting first downs at the end. But anyway, like I said, we're not going to go too deep into that.
Honestly, this episode, we have something very specific that Jake and I would like to talk about. We just want to give you guys a quick recap, our quick thoughts on what we thought about the first week of college football. But something interesting happened over the course of the past couple days with someone that you and I have followed, because you and I both are big San Francisco 49ers fans, and I think everyone is well aware of it now, is Colin Kaepernick and Nike. So it's Nike's 30th year, their anniversary of Just Do It, and they selected Colin Kaepernick to kind of be the narrator of this big commercial that is airing on the first night of pro football. And I've seen it on Twitter. I've seen the commercial. But for a lot of people, this is extremely controversial because of Colin Kaepernick, his history in, his kneeling down protesting over the last season, or the 2016 season, I should say, and then multiple players following suit after that. But so today, obviously, we don't want to be involved with politics on this podcast, right? Factivist Sports, we're not about necessarily diving into the politics, but more data-driven.
I'm not looking to be Jason Whitlock, Clay Travis, Keith Olbermann, guys that mold those two worlds. I'm not looking to be that way. And so if we come out on a positive light for Kaepernick in certain ways, we're going to look at the data and we're going to see what that tells us. And it's in no way condoning or supporting his protest, his method of protesting. We're not anti-police. We're not anti any race or nationality. We're not picking a side. We don't have a dog in that fight. And this is not our forum to argue that. We're just arguing the validity of a guy having a job. If I went anything political, it would be, I don't believe that, the president or outside pressures should, influence a boycott of a specific company or, the blackballing or the loss of a job of a specific individual. And so we're going to see, is that warranted? I mean, politics aside, should this guy have a job in the NFL last year, this year? Does his play, his production, and what he's accomplished, does it warrant him having a job? That's the main question.
And you and I, we've I don't want to say battled people, but we've had definitely discussion online with numerous people, both Facebook, Twitter, I mean, you name it, where someone is very opinionated on this stance of Colin Kaepernick, to where you and I, we've presented data before. Someone will say, Colin Kaepernick, he's trash. He's lost his job because, he's not good. He doesn't do X, Y, Z on the field. He doesn't have this stat. And then you and I, we've gone on, we've posted data before. And all these people, it either happens, you get blocked, they delete your comment if it's an admin that you're going up against. It's happened to me on numerous occasions. Or they just flat out don't respond. And the discussion goes cold. So you and I, we've had these discussions before, but that's what we're trying to focus on tonight with our episode, this episode of our podcast, answering the question: does Kaepernick's numbers warrant a position on one of the 32 team rosters? A lot of people, though, when we've been talking, even our family members, not a lot of people know the history behind Colin Kaepernick. When he came into the NFL, the circumstances on how he got the starting position with the 49ers, who was the coach at the time, what was going on with the team. So, Jake, why don't you give us a quick dive on the history of how Colin Kaepernick came to be the starting quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers?
Well, because we're here in Utah, part of Kaepernick is hated by one fan base because he kind of took a guy's job. So in 2011, the San Francisco 49ers, they were coming off of a long playoff drought. They hired Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh came in. He committed to Alex Smith as his starting quarterback early. They re-signed Alex Smith. They made him the starter. He led them. Harbaugh and Smith took the 49ers to a 13-3 record. They went to the NFC Championship game where they lost to the eventual Super Bowl champion, New York Giants, and Eli Manning on their home field in a muff punt in overtime, which I remember all too well. But then in the 2012 season, the 49ers finished with a record of 11-4-1. Okay, and in that season, Alex Smith sustained a concussion. Okay, they were playing the St. Louis Rams, and they actually ended up tying that game. Kaepernick came in relief, and they went to overtime, and they tied. And then Kaepernick did not relinquish the starting position the rest of the season. He went 5-2 as a starter the rest of the way. Lost a game to the Rams and the Seahawks, and then kind of won, most famous wins his first start versus the Bears, and then a win at New England in December on a Sunday night game on the NBC. So anyway, not to go too far into that season, but what we know happened is he took over that year, and then they went to the playoffs. They beat Green Bay, where he had the memorable game with 183 yards rushing.
I remember
and then
that
they
one.
went next week. They went to Atlanta, and they fell down big. And then they had a come from behind fourth quarter win, 28-24. Then they went to the Super Bowl. They came a play call, questionable play calling by Greg Roman. not giving Gore the rock inside the 10-yard line, throwing some, 3 straight passes to the corner, but also questionable no call on the PI. But they came really close to winning that game. And, Cap could have thrown a better ball and maybe got a touchdown. He could have tucked it and ran, could have audibled. A lot of things could have happened. But anyway, that's 2012. And what did he do? Following that up, the 49ers committed to him as a starter. They traded Alex Smith to the Chiefs. And then they left him as their starter. They went 12-4, and they went back to the NFC Championship game the next year, and they lost on the tip drill play. Richard Sherman, we remember that rant. Malcolm Smith, I believe, tipped the ball, and Richard Sherman tipped the ball rather, and the linebacker, I believe it was Smith, got the interception, and then they won, right? Well,
that's where you get the sorry receiver quote.
Yeah. And then so the next year they went 8-8, and Cap was the full-time starter again that year. Harbaugh was there, but that was the year where the reports came out before the season started that it was Super Bowl or no job for Harbaugh. Super Bowl ring or no job after 3 consecutive NFC title games.
I remember that seed being planted.
And Jay Glazer on NFL, and you're like, that can't even be real, can it? They went 8-8. But during those years, I believe you might have some of the defensive numbers and the defensive players, but Kaepernick had a good surrounding cast. They had a great team. Frank Gore, who's a future Hall of Fame running back, top 5 in all-time rushing yards. They had Vernon Davis, who's been an all-pro and a Pro Bowl tight end. They had Michael Crabtree. They had Randy Moss, Delaney Walker, who's a solid tight end, even still today. Then, in subsequent years, they had Anquan Bolden, Mario Manningham, who never put up great numbers, Stevie Johnson. But those are some of the Bruce Miller, who'd been a Pro Bowl fullback. Those are the players that were surrounding him, not leaving out Joe Staley and Mike Upati and some good offensive line play as well. They had a good team. And then on the defensive side of the ball, we all know Willis, Bowman, Justin Smith, Alden Smith, even the safeties got into the Pro Bowl a little bit. Whitner and Deshaun Goldson, right? Yeah. So they had a stacked roster and a stacked team. And so, but he helped them win, 4 playoff games in two playoff runs and 2 playoff appearances, won 4 games. And, they accomplished some good things. So, do you have some of those defensive numbers?
I was just going to say some of the highlights of those playoff wins are 2 times beating Aaron Rodgers, one of those times at Lambeau. Then you have Matt Ryan and Cam Newton. So definitely, a list of quarterbacks that people hold at a high standard. Now going back to those respective years that you were talking about in the glory years, 2012, 2013, you're absolutely right. The Niners had a crazy good defense. In 2012, they were second in total defense, only behind the Seattle Seahawks, which we all know is a great defense. And then in 2013, they're third in total defense, behind the Panthers and the Seahawks. So they definitely had a great defense. Now moving forward, transitioning to 2016, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. They go from the second best defense in 2012 to the 32nd best defense in 2016. So in talking with these people, you and I have noticed nobody wants to give credit to Kaepernick's performances. So they say, Cap didn't beat any of those teams. He didn't beat Matt Ryan. He didn't beat Cam Newton. He didn't beat Aaron Rodgers. No way. The defenses beat those guys. And to a point, to a certain extent, they're right, because those defenses were great. But you can't have it both ways. If you want to say that in 2012, the defense contributed to those victories, then you also have to accept the fact that in 2016, a lot of the losses that the Niners had were also contributed to the defense. The defense was giving up over 400 yards a game and 30 points a game. No team is going to win a lot of games when you're giving up 400 yards and 30 points a game.
As a seasons as a full starter, okay, he wasn't the full starter in 2015 or 2016, so you have to take that a little bit into consideration as well. There was some injuries. They played Blaine Gabbert a little bit, but in 2013 they were 12-4 and they went to the NFC Championship game, right? So when you're the third-ranked defense, you have a 12-4 record. When you also have a Hall of Fame running back and some other good weapons around you, right? When you have a 32nd ranked defense then your record goes down, and your record is 1-10 as a starter. There's a big difference, that defensive side of the ball, right? Now, you mentioned that 2016 season. Okay, I'm going to list you the wide receivers on that roster, and anybody listening, I want you to hear.
Well, first, let me highlight really quickly. You've already talked about a couple of these losses, but I don't think you've gone to the full extent of all the losses that the Niners had after that 2014 season. And according to, numerous articles online like Bleacher Report, they ranked the 49ers 2014 offseason as the worst offseason in NFL history because they lost Aldon Smith, Patrick Willis, Justin Smith, Anthony Davis, Chris Borland, Stevie Johnson, Andy Lee, Parrish Cox, Michael Crabtree, Frank Gore, Mike Upati, Josh Johnson, Brandon Lloyd, Kasim Osgood, Dan Skuta, and other players. Like, listen to that talent that they lost. And Jim Harbaugh on top of it.
And they replaced Jim Harbaugh with Luigi's brother, a.k.a. Jim Tomsula, who I call Mario. But those receivers we talked about, now 2016, there was even more turnover from 2015 to 2016 because in 2015 they had Anquan Boldin still. Yeah. And they had Vernon Davis for a little bit, but they traded him in the middle of the season.
To the Broncos, I believe, yeah.
Yeah, and
he ends up going and winning a Super Bowl. I guess he's on a Super Bowl team, yeah.
Yeah. So these are the receivers from 2016. Jeremy Curley was the leading receiver on that team with 667 yards. Quentin Patton, who was a receiver on that team, subsequently, that was his last season in the NFL, Quentin Patton. And then the other receivers, Torrey Smith, people know who that is a little bit. Yeah, okay, he's okay. Rod Streeter.
Who?
Chris Harper.
Who?
And Aaron Burbage.
Who?
Have you heard of those guys? How about the running backs? The running backs, you have Sean Drone. You remember him?
I remember him only because I watched the games, but I would have never guessed
Mike Davis?
Yeah.
DeJuan Harris?
Yeah. Not ringing a bell.
No, you do know Carlos Hyde, right? Carlos Hyde, he put in a decent number of yards that year.
Kind of hurt a lot, though.
He had 988 yards and almost crossed that threshold, 1,000 yards. Tight ends, Vance McDonald. Remember him?
Yeah, I remember Vance.
And Garrett Selleck. And Garrett Selleck, I mean, those guys are okay. Those guys are mediocre tight ends. Never put up big numbers, not going to go to the Pro Bowl.
So you're going from Frank Gore, who's going to be a Hall of Famer, to Sean Drone and Carlos Hyde, and then Vernon Davis, who's been in Pro Bowl tight end, to Vance McDonald. So definitely downgrading, right? And then we didn't even mention at one point, even though he was old, they still had Randy Moss, who was still considered a deep threat at one point. And then you have the Stevie Johnsons, the Michael Crabtrees, the Anquan Boldins, who you and I absolutely love. And then you're going to a Rod Streeter.
Yeah, Jeremy Curley, I mean, it's, he's a 3,000-yard career receiver. 660 of those yards are in a 49ers uniform. Rod Streeter, he's put up less than 100 yards in the 2 seasons after. Jeez. I believe the season before and the season after. He played, he was rostered, but he had less than 100 yards. So these are not impact players. These are bad players. Now, we bring this up because, like you said, if you're going to credit someone, if you're going to blame them for the team being bad, then credit them for the team being good. So, I mean, it's a team game, and, Cap's not going to win it by himself. Just like, no other quarterbacks.
Yeah, so I was going to say, so now that we've kind of given a brief history on how Cap came to be, the starting quarterback, the team, the differences in the team from 2012 and 2013 to when Cap, he was on SportsCenter all the time, highlight reels, and then you transition to 2015 when he's, he only starts a couple games. Blaine Gabbert comes in there. And then you move to 2016 where still he didn't start all 16 games. So you transition to 2016. So over that time span, what have his numbers actually been? His career numbers. A lot of people want to talk about he's not good enough to start. If he was a good enough starter, he would be one of the 64, 1-2 quarterbacks in the league. So clearly he's not on a roster. So that must mean that he doesn't have the stats, or he doesn't have the know-how or the performance metrics to be even a backup quarterback. So Jake, talk to us a little bit about his career numbers. Where does he actually rank in some
Or
of these?
he's regressed. I mean, that's another thing people like
or
to
he's
tell me.
regressed.
Well, he was regressed. He's not that old. Okay, so Colin Kaepernick, regular season numbers, quarterback rating. His career quarterback rating is 88.9. That ranks 16th all-time.
Puts him ahead of who?
Well, it's 16th all-time. 1 second. That would also be 10th amongst qualified active quarterbacks. So if he signs with the team, he's automatically the 10th highest rated career quarterback rating in the NFL. Okay, he's ahead of these retired notable Hall of Fame quarterbacks: Dan Marino, Brett Favre, Jim Kelly, Roger Staubach, Troy Aikman, Bart Starr, Fran Tarkenton, Dan Fouts, John Elway. And the list goes on and on. If he's number 16, he's ahead of a lot of guys, right? He's ahead of these active quarterbacks: Andy Dalton, Matt Stafford, Alex Smith, Andrew Luck, Jameis Winston, Ryan Tannehill, Cam Newton, Sam Bradford, Joe Flacco, Eli Manning. Now again, those are active qualified. There's other guys he's ahead of as well, but they don't have the volume like a Trubisky or someone like that, right?
Yeah, kind of a rookie last year. So
okay, that's quarterback rating. Interception percentage. Colin Kaepernick has a 1.8% career interception percentage. What does that mean? That means 1.8% of his career passes have been intercepted and caught by the other team. Okay, and these are regular season numbers. That is second all time only to Aaron Rodgers, and it is tied for second with Tom Brady.
That's some good company to be with. And the difference between Aaron Rodgers, I think it's like 0.2.
Yeah, Aaron Rodgers is 1.6%. Now, are we saying that he's as good as Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady? No. But he doesn't throw interceptions. I mean, if you were looking for a backup quarterback to go in and, hey, don't screw it up for us, don't lose the game, what's the number one thing you don't want him to do?
Turnovers.
Don't turn it over. Okay, let me dive in really quick to some playoff numbers. Okay, these are playoff wins, and these are just amongst active quarterbacks. Okay, this is the list of guys who are in the NFL right now who have more starting wins in the playoffs than Colin Kaepernick. Brady, Roethlisberger, Flacco, Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Eli Manning, Breeze. That's it. Okay. There's a tie with 4 playoff wins with Phillip Rivers and Matt Ryan. Okay, now, if Phillip Rivers, and we're not going to do a huge tangent on Phillip Rivers, but Phillip Rivers, this is one that stood out to me because I've heard people say, Phillip Rivers is probably a Hall of Fame quarterback, and I love the Hall of Fame debate discussion. I want to look at that in detail at some point. But his division has been a quarterback-weak division for most of his career. Who have the Raiders had the last 10, 12, 15 years as quarterback? Who have the Chiefs had? I mean, they had Alex Smith for a couple of years, but who else?
Yeah, but
who Alex have the Broncos had?
Alex Smith. I mean, you look at playoff quarterbacks. I think Joe Montana has more playoff wins in Kansas City than Alex Smith did.
Oh yeah, he does. Two in 2 years. But
so you can't say it's a formidable, division with these great quarterbacks.
Right. So, I mean, not to go too far on Phillip Rivers, but that's just the point. Yeah. Like, he's been in the league for a long time. His division has been wide open. If he was a great quarterback, you would think that he could muster more than 4 playoff wins in that long of a period of time. Now, these are the guys that he's ahead of. These are the guys that have won playoff games that are still in the league, or according to this list, they are. Nick Foles won the Super Bowl last year, 3 playoff wins. Andrew Luck, 3. Cam Newton, 3. Alex Smith, 2. Then you have kind of the miscellaneous misfit toy guys: Osweiler, Keenum, Mariota, Matt Schaub, all with 1 win. Cap has 4. Okay. Now, the one last stat I want to talk about for Cap in the playoffs. Okay. Everybody thinks when it comes to regular season, the top running quarterback in the league is Cam Newton. And people say he's the number 1 dual threat. He's this, that, and the other. But when it comes to playoffs, okay, Colin Kaepernick ranks 26th, and I won't really go over who's ahead of him, but he ranks 26th all time in average yards per game rushing in the playoffs at 84.5 yards. Now, he had that big game, 183 yards, absolutely. But over 6 games, you have to gain yards in the other games to still maintain that average. So, who is he ahead of as far as notable running backs in history? He's ahead of Marcus Allen, Franco Harris, Tony Dorsett, Adrian Peterson, Frank Gore, Curtis Martin, and Bo Jackson, just to name some. Those are notable names. Those are Hall of Famers plus Bo. And he got more yards on the ground when he went into the playoffs and put on a uniform than those guys did in their careers. Marcus Allen and last time I checked, Franco Harris had 4 Super Bowl rings for the Steelers. He was part of that dynasty. Marcus Allen, Super Bowl MVP for the Raiders in the early 80s. These are accomplished, all-time great players, Hall of Famers. He's averaged more yards per game. Now, some of them had more games. They played older ages. I get all that, but that's just to put it into context.
Yeah, I'm just touching back on what you were saying. I found an awesome little stat that I've always been using, and it's throughout the history of the NFL, which is 186 quarterbacks that have at least recorded 1,500 passing attempts. So 186 quarterbacks, 1,500 passing attempts. Colin Kaepernick ranks 5th best in passing touchdown to interception ratio at 72 touchdowns, 30 interceptions. So out of 186 quarterbacks, he's 5th best. But everyone will say, well, he can't throw, he makes mistakes. But to what you and I were just saying, he doesn't turn over the ball. He doesn't make those interception mistakes that people claim that he does. And he's thrown for 72 touchdowns. In another quick stat there is in 2016, which is, everyone, that's his last season in the NFL. He was the number 1 yards gain per QB scramble. Like, he ranked number 1 in yards gain per quarterback scramble at 9.1. And he was the 4th best touchdown to interception ratio at 4 to 1 in 2016. So he has the stats, right? The data is there, and you just laid it out perfectly.
So here's a couple things with Colin Kaepernick. He is not an elite quarterback. Okay, and I've never made that claim. When I go online and I've had these debates with people, I've always said, listen, he's good enough to be in the NFL, and he could be anybody's backup. He could also give a handful of starters in the league, I think anywhere from 5 to 12 opening day starters, he could give them a run for their money. If he was on their team, they may have a controversy on their hands. And, I've thrown some names out there, and recently I got in a little battle with some Dolphins fans because I put Tannehill's name on this list, and they're going crazy, like, whoa, have you watched Tannehill play? I said, well, when I turned,
yes.
I've never seen him play in January. That's the thing, right? So here's the list that I came up with, and you can disagree with this all that you want. Sam Darnold, Peterman, I don't even know his name in Buffalo, but he's as Cowherd would say, he's a waste of time to talk about.
The guy that threw 5 picks as soon as he entered the game.
Mitch Trubisky, Blake Bortles, Case Keenum, Ryan Tannehill, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Tyrod Taylor, Marcus Mariota, Sam Bradford. The one that everyone's going to freak out about, Joe Flacco, and then Jameis Winston, who's going to come back in about 4 games. I think that if any of those teams, if Cap's on that roster, there may be a quarterback controversy. They may get benched, they may get pulled, and they may put Cap in at some point because none of those quarterbacks are showing that they're huge quarterbacks. Now, the other one that you could put on that, I didn't put him on there. Numbers wise, he probably deserves to be on there is Eli, but I give the 2 rings the benefit of the doubt and OBJ coming back. Now, I've also said that there's a few teams where it probably doesn't make sense to put Kaepernick in on your roster. If you want your young guy to, if you are the Browns, I said Cap and Tyrod Taylor, it's arguable who's better, but they have Tyrod and they have Baker. they don't need a third guy in there. The Ravens, they may think, well, if we don't want Flacco, maybe we're going to go with Lamar Jackson. So there's a few teams where it may not make sense. But if the team was going to have a backup quarterback, the one that I highlight is the Green Bay Packers. Okay? They missed the playoffs last year. They went 7-9. Aaron Rodgers was 4-3 as the starter. Brett Hundley, who ranked number 30 in the NFL in quarterback rating last year of qualified passers, he went 3-6 as a starter for Green Bay. And I would watch these press conferences with the coach McCarthy, and he's, we have faith in him. We believe in him. Well, they believed in him so much that after the season, in the offseason, they just traded him. They brought in Deshaun Kaiser from Cleveland, who ranked 32nd in quarterback rating last year. So they found the one guy that was, literally the two players that performed worse.
And I'm going to touch on that
guy.
I'm going to touch on that in a minute.
And so Green Bay's one. I think that makes the most sense because Aaron Rodgers has shown a propensity to get injured, right? I don't know. He hasn't missed a lot of games in every year, but he missed significant time last year. 9 starts, that's a lot. Also Pittsburgh, New Orleans, Seattle, I think Carolina, those are all teams where it makes sense, where the starters have at least gotten a little bit banged up in the past or they scramble. And if you put Cap on those teams, there's probably not a controversy for who's going to start. And so he can be the backup and he can be your insurance policy. And I just don't understand how a team like Green Bay can sit there, knowingly have a pathetic backup quarterback on their roster, and then knowing that Aaron Rodgers, almost said Brett Favre, knowing that Aaron Rodgers could get hurt again because his collarbone. Is he going to turn into Tony Romo? I don't know. And you're not going to win games with those guys. You're not going to win games with Deshaun Kaiser. I don't care what anyone says.
So you just give a list of people that you think Colin Kaepernick could beat out or be a backup for. Washington Post, they created a Colin Kaepernick tracker, and this is what they did. They took Colin Kaepernick's 2016 numbers and they ran them against last year's 2017 quarterbacks. And this is the list that they put. Now this is based on completion percentage, touchdowns, interceptions, and average net yards per attempt. So that's the criteria that they put. And these were the quarterbacks that Kaepernick ranked ahead of: Marcus Mariota, Cam Newton, Jacoby Brissett, Eli Manning, which you said might be on the fence, Mitch Trubisky, Jay Cutler, Joe Flacco, Trevor Siemian, Brett Hundley being 31st on this list, and then Deshaun Kaiser 32nd. So the two worst quarterbacks on this list that performed last year, Brett Hundley and Deshaun Kaiser, the Packers have rolled the dice with as being their backup quarterback. But that right there's 9 or 10 quarterbacks where Colin Kaepernick beat them out according to that criteria. And then he basically tied with Andy Dalton, Tyrod Taylor, Dak Prescott, and Carson Palmer. So that's comparing his 2016 stats to the 2017 stats. So the list that you came up with, and people will say, you're crazy. You're absolutely crazy. There's no way Eli Manning, Joe Flacco, Cam Newton, there's no way, they can be put in that list. Well, if you actually look at the data would suggest that absolutely you can put those guys in your list of Colin Kaepernick could beat them out or be a backup role, to those guys. And it's not out of the question. It's completely reasonable. So we've gone over the stats. We've gone over his individual stats. We've gone over the history. We've gone over the accolades of NFC Championship, Super Bowl starting quarterback, beating, really good opponents in the playoffs. So why do you think he's out of the NFL? Why do you think he doesn't have a roster spot? I mean, you and I, we've talked about, and everyone, people can say the stats, but you and I, we've debunked that, right? It's not his play. That's just not the case. So it must go to the protests. And people are deeming the protest as this thing where you just cannot come back from. You have dug your own grave and you are done. There's no way you're getting another spot on a roster. But we've noticed in professional sports, some people will turn the other cheek and they will allow certain things in their respective sports, and fans will go with it and they'll back up these players, whether it comes to DUIs, substance abuse, domestic violence. I mean, there are numerous NFL teams that are having issues with this, but are still giving guys second chances.
So I made a list of 4 things, just kind of 4 final points to make about the cap situation, and we'll dive into the criminality in the league. But number 1, all the pro sports leagues kind of have a different unforgivable sin, right? And it might not be unforgivable for every player that's ever done it, but for some players. In baseball, when you talk about PEDs as they are, claimed or attached to Barry Bonds or Roger Clemens, they've been demonized.
That's the ultimate evil.
They've been vilified and demonized. They're out of the Hall of Fame when they should have been first ballot all-time great in the conversation for GOAT for their positions type of players, right? But in the NFL, what happens to a guy? Can you remember one player who's been demonized and vilified for PEDs? The last notable name I remember is Von Miller cutting up the dance floor and Dancing with the Stars after winning a Super Bowl MVP trophy. Nobody cares that Von Miller was using PEDs. Nobody cares about that. In the NFL, the anthem protest is what it is. Ask Kaepernick or Eric Reed. Now, not every other player that's knelt, but they wanted to cut off the head of the snake, right? And that's what they're doing. Now, but in the NBA, it's on the other side. What LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Chris Paul, Carmelo Anthony, they stand up at the ESPYs and make some statements. They have they have a lot of political statements. Yeah. Are the same fans that are calling for Kaepernick and burning their Nikes and calling for him to be benched, are they doing the same thing to the NBA?
Absolutely not.
Are they burning their LeBron's shoes? I don't see it happening. So I think there's a little bit of inconsistency there. Anyway, the second point is, if this were, and this gives a little bit of credence to people saying he's not good enough. He is good enough to be in the league, and he should be in the league. That's our conclusion. But I will give him this point. If Peyton Manning or Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers or Drew Brees, if one of those guys, if they had a cause near and dear to their heart and they said, the way I'm going to bring awareness to whatever cause this is I'm going to go kneel down during the national anthem. I don't anticipate that the fans and the public and the owners would have the same response. Now, I'm not trying to go and do like a racial thing or anything like that, because I think those guys are the face of franchises, the face of the league, and they're global brands by themselves. And I just don't think that they're a big enough brand and they're a good enough player that I think they can do that. I mean, Aaron Rodgers has already, come out and said a lot of things in support of these movements. And that's one reason why I think that would be a perfect spot for Cap. Third thing, as you said, the NFL, every team employs cheaters and those convicted of crimes like assault, abuse, rape, drugs, etc. And Cap hasn't done any of those things. But yet every year, guys that are on video punching a girl in college, they get drafted and they're on a team. First round pick. And no one cares.
Yeah.
Pac-Man Jones keeps getting signed every single year. And these guys with checkered pasts and problematic situations in their lives, they get a job time after time. And there are guys that are just as good at their position, fringe starters at every other position that are in the league. And then the fourth thing that I wanted to just make a statement or a point is stating that Kaepernick should be in the NFL is in no way supporting his protest or the method he's used to carry it out. It's simply saying that if he did not protest, he would be in the NFL today. And I think that's the bottom line.
And that's what we were trying to prove is, if the protest didn't happen, do the numbers warrant a position on a 32-team roster, right? The 32 teams, 53-man roster, do the stats warrant that? And yes, they do. We've gone over that. So if the protest didn't happen, would he have a position? Yes. So the fact that he doesn't have a position, what the heck's going on? And that's why he's suing the NFL.
Okay. And I want to close with this. Anybody that wants to challenge this or listen or whatever, go out there and find me a quarterback in NFL history who is as accomplished and has the numbers that he has had that was not given a second chance with a second franchise. You go find me that name and go, I haven't found him. So you tell me who, and you tell me when, and you tell me what. And, then we can have a discussion about that. But if you can't find that guy, then you need to concede your argument if you're the guy that's holding on to the garbage QB claim and or the he's just not good enough or he'd be in the league claim.
I mean, you look at how decorated he is, starting in a Super Bowl, everything else that we've already talked about, and the fact that he hasn't received a second chance is just crazy. We've talked about it, and since 2000, I know it's going back quite a ways now. You're looking at 17, 18 years, but since 2000, there have been 855 arrests in the NFL. That's a crazy amount of arrests. 215 DUI charges, 99 drug charges, 96 domestic violence cases, 71 assaults. A lot of these guys have been given second chances. A lot of them. Second, even third chances. So the fact that Cap hasn't gotten one is just preposterous. But anyways, guys, that's all we have for this episode. Hopefully we've changed a couple minds out there. We've provided enough data for a lot of people to kind of look at Colin Kaepernick's situation and kind of see really what type of quarterback he was and how good he really was when he was on the playing field. And we know what he's done for the game and what he's done on and off the field. So let us know what you think. Leave us a comment on the podcast on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to visit factivistsports.com for all of our latest content and to sign up for all of our email updates. And Jake, anything else you want to leave with our viewer or with our listeners?
No, that's it. Thanks for listening. You guys have a good one.